This Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends in May 1982. I'm visiting with Mr. Lou Burns. Is that Lou, Louis, or how do you say the accent?
Louis Francis.
Francis, F-R-E-N-C-I-S Burns. And Mr. Burns lives in California now, but he's attending and participating, and is really the man who put together the Tinker family reunion. It is taking place this weekend. Some of the descendants of the Tinker family, and I'm going to be talking with him not only about a little about his own background, but about how he found all these Tinkers that he put together here. Mr. Burns, I think to begin with, I'd like to ask you to tell a little of your background, who your parents, and where they came and where you grew up. Just a little bit about your early life and your family parentage.
My mother is Bessie Tinker. My father was Lee Robert Burns. They were married at Bartlesville, Oklahoma. My father and I both were born at Elgin, Kansas, which is on the state line, right on the line between Kansas and Oklahoma. But we had a ranch in the Osage, and I grew up on the ranch, went to school in Bartlesville, and graduated from Elgin High School. I went to Aviation Tech School at Spartan School Aeronautics at Tulsa when I graduated from high school. Then worked for a time at Lockheed Aircraft, Spartan Aircraft, Beach Aircraft in Wichita, Spartan in Tulsa, and Lockheed in Burbank, California. I was working at Beechcraft when World War II started, and joined the United States Marine Corps, served at Guadalcanal, South Pacific, and the Central Pacific, Kwajalein, so on, and was medically discharged at the end of the war for slight injury. Went back to the ranch for 1 year, and then entered Kansas State University, Emporia, Kansas, and graduated with a master's degree in social science, also with a BS in Ed, double social science, art, and English minors. Taught for 10 years at Shawnee Mission, senior high, was a graduate assistant at Emporia, and taught geography at Emporia. Then went to Santa Ana, California, taught in the high schools at Santa Ana, and then at Santiago College in Santa Ana. Had to take medical retirement a few years back because of tic de la rue. And so had time to do a little writing, which I'd always wanted to do.
I'd like to swing back now. This is a very interesting background, and I want to swing back now into Oklahoma, your period growing up on the ranch, to talk a little about the work on the ranch and some of the experiences that you may have had in Oklahoma at that time.
Well, in my childhood, there were still many of the old drovers who had driven cattle up the Chisholm Trail, ranchers, so on, all around northern Osage County, and Elgin from about 1881 to 1907 was supposed to be the world's largest shipping point for cattle. So everything was cattle in northern Osage. Typically, the movies do not very much describe the old cattlemen that I knew, at least. Most of them wore boots that were square at the top, usually about 17 inches high on the legs, commonly with about a 2.5 to a 3-inch heel, and the bootstraps hung out on either side. Many of the old cowpunchers, when they bought a pair of boots, put their spurs on, and they never took them off until the boots were worn out. I can still hear in my mind's ear, so to speak, the clump those boots and spurs made on the wooden boardwalks in a little town near the ranch, which is since burned. The old walks are gone, but that clumping, ringing sound of the spurs and boot heels is something you never forget. It's like the squeak of a saddle or the sound of a running horse. You just don't forget it. Most of the cattle were Hereford, crossbred with Longhorns, but a few ranchers still had the old Longhorns. They had a feeling for them and kept them more as sentimental than for economic reasons. Some of the old cowpunchers I knew was Walter Thompson. He was a Texas drover and a real fine cattleman. He never owned a ranch that I knew of, but worked as a cowpuncher around. Another was Frank Todd. Frank couldn't read or write, and my sister and us two boys taught him to read and write. During the winter, we'd go out to the bunkhouse, and Frank would be out there, and he wanted to learn to read. When he read cowboy stories, pulp magazines. Another native cowpuncher who was just the best man with cattle I ever worked cattle with was a man named Gene Herrard. I don't know if I've never seen it in the movies or read about it anywhere else, but Gene called it whipping the bull. He always carried about a 25-foot bull whip, handmade by himself. Usually it was rawhide at the handle, out to about 4 foot of the tip, and then buckskin out the rest of the way. My father sent me out to bring in some cattle, and I left the gate open, went out, and had about 30 cows and a bull to bring in. Well, I got him up to the gate, and the bull planted himself in the gate and wouldn't let the cows in. When I forced them, well, then they'd break from me. And I did this 3 times, and finally Gene came out to help me, and the first thing he did was take his bullwhip down, and he'd make real giant swings with the bullwhip around and around his head, and then crack it over the bull's head. Not hit him, because it just sliced him like a ribbon, but he would crack that whip. After that, all we had to do, of course, he cracked it several times over him, drove him clear to the other end of the place, about a mile away, and we had no trouble handling cattle. But after that, if we wanted to get that bull out of our way, we just clapped our hands and he'd take off at a dead run. But that's the only time I've ever seen the whipping a bull. You've probably heard of stopping a stampede by milling cattle. We were taking I suppose a couple of carload of cows would be about, or steers, perhaps 120 head, 60 to a carload, into town, and we got just about to the loading pens when the morning train came in and tooted their whistle. Well, they started running, and Gene and Walter Thompson, all the older men called him Tunk, but of course we were taught not to call people by their nickname. But anyway, they headed them, and that's the first and only time I've ever seen cattle thrown in a mill. The ones in the middle just turn around in their tracks, and the other on the outside are running at dead run, just around the circle. and pretty soon they run down, and then you can handle them. But yeah, after we drove them off, you could just see where the grass was all torn up, just in almost a perfect circle. So that's just some of the things I can recall as a youngster. We always trailed our cattle to town. It was only a 7-mile drive, but there were no fences on either side of the road, and when you came to a patch of timber, it was murder to get them through past those patches, because they'd hit for the trees, and then you had to watch for low limbs and so on, or you'd get unseated pretty fast. Usually you got your shirt torn off too. But later they took the railroad out of Elgin, and the last time I was on a drive, we drove to Big Heart, which was 9 miles to the south, Big Heart, Oklahoma. It no longer exists either. But these were some of the things. We grew up working cattle. My father was a little old-fashioned, I suppose. He still rough-worked cattle, but we worked from the corral rather than roping them from horseback. I usually did the roping. My brother did the wrastling, and he would buy, say, a carload, 60 head of bull calves, and it would take us 2 weeks to dehorn them, brand them, and operate on them, and vaccinate them, and then about the time he'd let us rest for a few weeks, and then he'd buy another carload and put us to work again.
You didn't live too far from the 101 Ranch, was it operating and active when you were growing up?
Oh, yes. I remember they had a bear over there that drunk soda pop. They'd take an ice pick and punch a hole in the cap, and the bear would drink it that way. Or beer. He liked beer better, but they had to kind of ration him on his beer. But yes, Zach Miller and all of them were still out there.
What do you remember about that? Any of the shows or any of the people that you may have seen?
Not too much. We didn't go over that direction. See, we were over in the north part of the county on Pond Creek, and 101 was over by Ponca, south and west of Ponca, which was clear across the county from us. Oh, I suppose 50, 60 miles. I might mention I was talking with Joe Rabbit, who has land next to ours. We have a section and a half that we lease out now. But Joe was telling me that the reason they didn't come down to Pawhuska very often was that they had to open 67 gates to get here. And that was certainly a deterrent to traveling much.
Did you ever know Bill Pickett, or was he ahead of your time?
Yes, he was ahead of my time. See, I was born in 1920, and in January. I always say me and the horses have our birthday at the same time. But I don't remember a whole lot about the 101. We used to go down occasionally, but not too much. So,
who were some of the early personalities you remember of where you were living up in the area?
Well, I remember Al Spencer when he got out of prison. Of course, there's a more famous outlaws. Al Spencer, not Al Jennings. I knew him too. I mean, I remember him. But we had heard so many tales about Al Spencer that we as youngsters had in our mind's eye a huge man, big, strong man. And so we all were waiting at the railroad station depot for the train to come in, because we knew Al was coming in. He just got out of Lansing prison, and we kept looking for this man to get off, and there was a little guy, I'd say if you stretched him out pretty good, you might get 5-8 out of him, but not likely. And I don't think he had an ounce of fat on him. He was pretty bent, and of course his legs, like most of the old-timers, were pretty well bowed. And we were just shocked when some of the old-timers walked up to him and greeted him and said, "That's Al Spencer." And I don't know too much about his outlaw career, except they had us kids wide-eyed. Now, I'd heard stories about Al Spencer before I heard about the Daltons or anyone else up in that area. But sometimes someone who catches publicity of various kinds is better known than someone who doesn't, even though the other did more.
You're probably looking for someone with a mask on and a gun belt or something like that.
Oh, no, but we thought he'd be a great big man, you know. But most of these old survivors that I remember of the trail days and so on were all wiry individuals. They didn't carry a lot of flesh.
Probably the only way to make bullets miss them, wouldn't it?
Well, I went down to Herd one time with my dad, and we had an old open Hudson touring car. And he made me stay in the car, and Bill Easley of the Rocking Chair Ranch, just a little bit to the east of Herd. Well, I don't know, he and his son-in-law didn't get along too well. And, Bill always went around with two pearl-handled, silver-mounted 45s, one on each hip. And, it was a little rare to see a man carrying guns on the side. They usually carried them in the saddlebags. If they had saddlebags on their horses, well, they just carried their pistol in the saddlebag. If you've ever packed one of those old hog legs around for an hour or so, you know what I'm talking about. Boy, they're not light, and they're a nuisance, you know. They're in your way. But anyway, Bill and his son-in-law got in an argument, and the first thing I knew, why, Bill drew his guns, and his son-in-law had a .45 automatic, and he drew it, and they started exchanging shots there, and my dad come boiling out right in the line of fire and dove down and grabbed hold of me and socked me down on the ground. But anyway, that blew over, and then, about 3 or 4 months later, why, Bill Easley did kill the son-in-law killed Bill on the courthouse steps there at Bartlesville. So that was the only gunfight I ever saw. I can tell you of a gunfight my dad when he was a kid and his friend. It seems that
Where was this?
This was on the streets of Elgin, Main Street, right in front of what was known as the Lawson Hotel. You may be interested in the registry. It has some very well-known people in it. But anyway, the old Lawson Hotel is right in front of it. And Lloyd Lawson and my father were boyhood friends, and they kind of grew up on the streets there of Elgin, which was very wild in the late 1890s and so on. There were lots of gunfights, a lot of problems. But a new steam tractor, someone had bought one, and it was parked in front of the hotel in the middle of the street. So, being boys, they had to look that new machine over. And they were up on the steam tractor when a gunfight broke out, and so one bet on one man and one bet on the other, and the men were out in the middle of the street and were stalking each other with a tractor as in between them. And so each of the boys was urging their man, keeping him informed where the other was, and here were these two men trying to shoot each other. So that was one incident that happened there on the main street of Elgin. But there were lots of those. I inherited my grandfather Burns's old saloon. I say saloon. It was a saloon, rooming house, undertaking establishment. And then out behind he had a livery stable. So I guess he was pretty busy. But anyway, he had steel shutters. I found them down in the basement. And but these steel shutters were put on the glass windows when a trail crew hit town, because they'd shoot the town up and shoot the windows out. And you could still see the gray splatters on the steel on the outside side of them. So there must have been a lot of wild shooting going on.
It's a tremendous story. It's real good. Now you went to Guadalcanal, you say, with the Marines. Why don't you talk a little bit about that experience? Because that was that was during probably the worst part of the war, because we were really losing at that time, before it turned around. Why don't you tell a little about the Marine experience, if you would?
All right. Well, I was in Marine aviation. In the Marine Corps, you're an infantryman first and then a specialist second. In other words, every Marine, that's just different than the Army. In the Marine Corps, regardless of what your specialty is, you are primarily an infantryman. For this reason, Marine units do not carry ground defense units. This has bearing on Guadalcanal, is the reason I'm explaining it. I was a qualified expert rifleman. There were 3 out of 63 of us that qualified as expert. That was the champion platoon. Usually they had maybe 1 out of 63 that qualified as expert. I'm explaining that because I'm a little proud of being a good rifle shot. And we're talking about ranges up to a mile in firing for record, which has no use to you whatsoever in the jungles. Accuracy is not an asset, particularly. The ability to fire fast is what counts. So, in any event, we went in, I was in what was known as VMF, which means heavier than air fighters. 123 Marine Air Group 11. The next squadron after us was VMF 124 Marine Air Group 11, which was a Corsair squadron. And we had Grumman Wildcats, or F4 F4s. The commander of VMF 124 was known as Pappy Boynton. But our commanding officer was a Major Johnston. In any event, we all, VMF 124, VMF 123, all of MAG 11, went in on the 11th wave at Guadalcanal. The first wave is usually a pretty good time to go in. The second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth are deadly waves in a landing. Those are the bad ones. By the time you get down to the 14th, it's relatively simple operation. So we had staged in Efate in the New Hebrides and then gone north by destroyer to the Solomons and had landed in landing craft LSTs. We landed between the island of Tulagi and what was known as Lunga Point. Immediately to the eastward of Lunga Point was what we called Henderson Field. This was our operational area. Line company, or what is called infantry in the Army, had penetrated about half the length of Henderson Field and could push the Japanese back no further. We had no artillery, and the Japanese had artillery up in the limestone caves firing down upon us. The islands in the South Pacific are characterized by a coral beach, usually either snowy white or creamy white, then a hummock with coconut palms growing on the hummock. Immediately behind that is a swampy area and a tangled jungle type of ranges, which is almost impossible to get through without a machete. You break out of that, and then you break into sort of a savanna area with grass, and the grass has edges on it that are just like razor blades. That is as far as we had penetrated, that is line company, and but we set up operations at our end of Henderson immediately. Our planes, when they came in, would have to come in over the Japanese and under fire continually until they got up to our end. We would then service our aircraft, send them out, jump on a truck, and go join line company, and we'd push the Japanese back. And with our combined help, line company was able to push the Japanese back up against a cliff. What is called the rainforest area. Huge trees. Of course, you'd have trouble reading the newspaper at midday down on the floor of the forest, and then behind that would be the cliffs. But in any event, we would get them pushed back, and about that time, it would take us about 4 hours. Our aircraft would be coming in. We'd jump on a truck, go back, service our aircraft, send them out again, and we kept this up for about 2 weeks. I might mention that the stretch of water between Tulagi Island and Lunga Point was called Torpedo Junction, and there was an area of bodies that I suppose was a mile and a half, 2 miles, maybe the width of a highway. Bodies 2 and 3 feet, 2 and 3 bodies deep, that had washed up sailors, Japanese sailors, Anzacs, Australian, New Zealand troops, American troops that had been torpedoed in the Tulagi Straits. Terrible thing. Finally, they did have to rope it off because of the odor. The bodies decay rapidly in the tropics. You think we had rains recently. Until you've seen one of those tropic rains, you haven't seen rainfall. They measure their annual rainfall in feet, not in inches. And it rains in the wintertime. It rains about every 20 minutes for 20 minutes, and then the sun comes out, which means you are in an extremely humid condition. I used to wonder what everybody was complaining about, but since I've got used to drier climate and then come back here in the spring, I find out what they're talking about. But I was used to it then, and I couldn't understand what everybody was hollering about. So we had a character we called Washing Machine Charlie that came over one evening, and I thought I was in a foxhole, and I wasn't quite in it, and got a little injury, and they sent me back to Auckland, New Zealand, and then back to the States. And then later in the war, I was out at Kwajalein and the Marshalls, which was one of the most heavily bombarded areas in World War II. 27 days, 27 nights, bombs, shells, whatever. The only thing left standing on the island was a command post, Japanese command post, with 6-foot walls, reinforced concrete. Bars in that was as big as your wrist, but it got hit with an 18-inch naval shell. Just gutted it. So I was a crew chief, Marine Air Transport Service. We were flying medical supplies into Evo and wounded out. We had TSMGs, Thompson submachine guns, so stick them out the window and shoot to take off. So that's about all I can tell you.
Where'd you go from Guadalcanal?
To Auckland, New Zealand, and then what we called Mobile Hospital 4. And then when I got ambulatory, they sent me over to a sort of an annex that was under Ellerslie racetracks. It was in under the grandstand, and we had Australian nurses. They called them sisters there. The one on our ward was Sister Mackenzie, and she was a World War I nurse. Bless her heart, she was a sweet lady. But the beds there were just sawhorses with slats run lengthwise, and then blue gunny sacking with straw in it, and the fleas were just thick in there. And I got a flea bite on the eyelid, and I asked Sister Mackenzie what in the world I could do for that, and she said, the wee one got you. Very Scottish in her speech, but she fixed it up. She knew what to do for it.
Did you ever go back in combat after that?
Well, no, they called it combat. No actual, just landing and taking off at Evo, a little fire, but nothing to speak of. I got tickled. A lot of the boys started following me around when we'd go through a jungle area because I could see the Japanese where they couldn't. I was a squirrel hunter, see, and you learn in hunting squirrels to look out the peripheral vision. And these boys didn't know that trick. You see a movement out of the peripheral vision, then you focus on it. But if you try to I got tickled. A lot of the boys started following me around when we'd go through a jungle area because I could see the Japanese where they couldn't. I was a squirrel hunter, see, and you learn in hunting squirrels to look out the peripheral vision. And these boys didn't know that trick. You see a movement out of the peripheral vision, then you focus on it. But if you try to focus on a limb or something, you won't see the movement. And consequently, they couldn't understand why I could see them, and they couldn't. But it comes from practicing squirrel hunting. I would recommend for combat troops squirrel hunting. It's the best training they can get.
Now your injury that you were discharged on was what?
Charlie dropped a bomb, and it hit a palm tree, and I didn't have one leg in, and crushed it against the coral sides. Well, I got what they call fungus infection in it. It's very common in the tropics. At that time, they didn't know much about it, and they learned.
Have you had any, after that, after getting out, did you have any repercussions from it?
Nothing, but the second trip out, I got fungus again.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, once it gets in your blood, and you get into those tropical conditions, why it comes back. If you get around coral islands.
Does it still ever come back to you?
It hasn't in recent years, no. I have to be careful, but, be sure I'm dry and so on.
You wasn't involved in your having to take a medical retirement, though, earlier?
Yes, I retired. I was discharged after the second trip medically.
I meant from your civilian work. You said you retired from teaching.
Oh, yes, that was Tic de la Rue.
And that's Tic de la Rue.
No, it's here in the face.
Oh, I see.
See, I'm numb on the left side
Oh, I see.
of my face. No.
You can't tell you now.
Well, I sag here, but I sag a little on the left.
I didn't notice it. And your talking doesn't doesn't show it at all.
Well, it took a little practice. At first, after I had this operation to stop the tick, it was kind of like someone with a stroke, you know. You have to relearn.
What causes it?
The trigeminal nerve comes off of the medulla and then goes, one branch goes this way and another this way, and then that is a nerve that serves your face. But an artery sooner or later starts rubbing, a tendon rubs against the nerve, or an artery pulses against it, and that sets it off. It's horrible pain.
You describe and remember experiences so well, and almost without prompting to get going, which very few people do. I wonder if you'd relate some of your teaching experiences that you have had. You know, I think that whether they're here or California or wherever, Shawnee Mission, that's Kansas, and
yes.
Why don't you tell about some of those?
Well, I started as a geographer. Of course, I had a graduate fellowship in geography, although my major work was in history and art. But it seems that geographers were somewhat scarce, and of course, I had a lot of geography also. But at Shawnee Mission, I have to be honest and say we had a marvelous student body there, not a normal high school student body, and consequently 3 high schools in the United States have been rated as top-rated: Newton, Massachusetts, and New Trier, Illinois, and Shawnee Mission for years have, on national merit winners, on that basis, have always been outstanding. Of course, there was only the senior high when I started teaching at Shawnee Mission. I taught there for 10 years. It was a marvelous student body. It's what Jose Ortega y Gasset calls the spirit of place. They had that spirit to learn, and it was amazing to see problem students come from other schools and watch them in a study hall. They would just stare around for about 2 weeks. They just couldn't believe they would see 150 students in one room without someone standing over them studying. They couldn't believe it. But it was the spirit of place, and within 2 weeks, that problem student would be doing the same thing. It was utterly fantastic. Marvelous student body. And again, spirit of place. It had been a tradition there, and it kept on. I will say that we had a good faculty. We worked well together, and they made a special point of a new faculty member making sure they used what we called the buddy system. An older, experienced teacher would kind of take you under their wing and lead you around and break you in. It was a scary, frightening experience to many, and they never returned. And others, they hung in there. We lost good teachers. I think one of the finest math teachers I ever knew, and a natural teacher, which is a rare gift, as you know. I mean a gifted teacher, math teacher, but he had a large family of children to support, and he couldn't afford to teach. Atomic Energy hired him for 3 times what he was getting teaching. And he had the brains and he had the ability to teach. It's a shame. Those are rare.
Yeah.
He came back for about 3 years and said, I sure miss that teaching. He loved teaching. But he stayed with the Atomic Energy Commission. But that's one of the problems in education, as we all know. But we must preserve our gifted teachers above all. They are rare. Now, there's good teachers. I'm not saying that there aren't good teachers. I'm speaking about the gifted. That's something special, and they're very rare. I had taught at Emporia. I taught the relation of geography to history, and of course, introductory. You graduate fellows always teach introductory courses. Introductory geography. My specialty, of course, was frontier history, and I did my thesis on the fur trading ventures of Ogies and Pierre Cadet Choteau. And I took doctoral work at USC. Got my orals out of the way, but I just never did go back. I think I'm like Jacques Barzun. After those exams, Barzun says, I knew a great deal for one day. You've probably been through it too. You know what I'm talking about. But I don't know. I just kind of lost my thirst for academic studies after that.
You know, you tell me you're writing. What are you writing about? What all are you writing about? I know you've done a genealogy. What all are you writing in?
Well, I'm trying to do a very silly thing in one way, and in another, it's something I feel must be done. Someone's got to do it. The scarcity of Osage Records is no news to anyone. The availability of information about the Osages is a scandal. They're very interesting people, and what I am trying to do is gather from various sources, National Archives or wherever, information about the Osages and their people, and get it out in some kind of form that can be circulated and made available. You know as well as I do, people do not write unless the information is available. And I think the time is now. The Osages have been in the past extremely reluctant to release information. Now I sense and feel that there's a thirst for it, and that now is the time it must be done. Like Dyson Mitchell, my mother, and many others. I'm sorry I didn't see Lily here, Lily Cunningham, but I think she was afraid she was going to get interviewed.
She was running anybody off.
But in any event, it needs to be done. John Joseph Matthews did a very nice job in the Children of the Middle Waters, the Osages, but it's not a people's history. It's a student's, a scholar's history. And the Osage people are well educated, but they're not necessarily scholars. And I think there is a need more and more to get it into a people's type of history. And Matthews did a marvelous job. I'm not downgrading him, but after all, it is a very scholarly type of thing, and unless you have the background to comprehend what he is saying, I've heard many of them complain about it, you know, that it isn't too good, but it is. It's excellent. It's just that it's scholarly.
I'd like to hear a little about this reunion. How the search for I know lots of names were available, but I know a lot of others were searched out as a result of coming to this reunion. I know that many people who came here to this reunion had never been to one before, and maybe had never heard about one before. Why don't you tell me about what all was involved in putting it together?
Well, started planning this a little better than a year ago. Of course, first, it's like almost, well, it's like little Eva, you know, it's kind of like Topsy. I mean, it just grew. But we had made several trips to Ottawa and Montreal, I suppose 3 or 4, researching these French Osage families, and we did a lot of research. We, meaning my wife and I, we helped each other research, and I researched so much on the Tinkers. My father's family is a small family. That is, they didn't have a lot of children per generation, and consequently, they were a prominent family in the Shenandoah and so on, all that. But the Tinkers were so numerous, and what was so fascinating is the number of lines in the 6th generation, counting from the immigrant to the North America. There was 118 male descendants of one man, which means 118 lines, although today I would estimate, and purely estimate, that there's about 15, possibly 16 surviving lines of Tinkers beyond the 6th generation. We have found, and I just discovered just before I came over here, that a new line of Tinkers, they also are from Yorkshire, like our John was, and like the Thomas who signed the compact. But my idea is approximately 100 years ago, about early 1880s, a old minister by the name of Reverend William Durant back in Connecticut began to research the Tinkers. I might mention that in the 2nd generation, Amos Tinker and Samuel Tinker married sisters, Durant sisters. And consequently, all Tinkers in the United States carried Durant blood, see. Durant, of course, is a French name, and they were Huguenot French who went to New England, Connecticut. But anyway, Durant planned on publishing his genealogy of the Tinkers about 1908, but he died before he got the job completed, so his manuscript was deposited in the Connecticut Historical Society, not the State Historical Society, but Connecticut. It consists of 8 boxes of manuscript. I have gone through it many times, made many trips to Hartford to go through it, and have copied the first 6 generations and then verified them with the Barber collection and so on. But if you figure from the turn of the last to the present century, this is about 4 to 5 generations that have passed by since Durant did any research, and no one else has been that complete. We have individual lines, but not the total lineage of all the lines. And so part of the purpose here was to bring everybody together and try to find a way that we could update for the next 100 years. And that was what lay behind it.
Well, I certainly appreciate it a lot. This has been an interview with Lou Burns in California. What town in California are you from? I don't know if I ever asked you.
Fallbrook.
Fallbrook. Where is Fallbrook?
That's northern San Diego County.
I see.
We've gone as far as we can. That's the southeasternmost county in the United States.
And we certainly appreciate this interview. Thank you very much.